Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 375 of the Juicebox Podcast. On today's show, Jenny Smith and I will discuss different ideas around calibrating continuous glucose monitors. My perspective, of course, will come from the Dexcom G6 because that's what Arden uses. Jenny also wears the G6, but she has worn the Medtronic CGM. And many of you have added your thoughts to this episode through the private Facebook group for the podcast. I asked this question, hey, calibrating your CGM, yes or no? And we got a lot of answers, and they're all woven into this episode. At the end, I will read directly to you from Dexcom's website. And of course, while you're listening, I'd love it if you'd remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Please always consult a physician before making changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. I also took a few minutes from the conversation while Jenny was setting up her microphone and everything, and she was admitting to not being able to do something around her house, and I put it at the end of the episode so you can enjoy it. Jenny is delightful. You want to know something else about Jenny? You can hire her. Just go to integrateddiabetes.com. Jenny Smith has been living with type 1 diabetes for 31 years. She holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and biology from the University of Wisconsin. She's a registered and licensed dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and certified trainer on most makes and models of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitors. She is also a very good friend of the podcast, so check her out. And while you're looking, check out the Contour Next One blood glucose meter. Go to contournext.com/juicebox to find what I believe to be the greatest blood glucose meter available. Second chance test strips, super bright light for nighttime viewing. It fits easily in your hand, but doesn't slip away. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it's easy to hold. You don't drop it. I like the shape. I like how portable it is. I can find it in a bag at night without the lights on. I've never told you that before, but it's easy to find in a bag. And its testing ability is just first class. contournext.com/juicebox, or the links in your show notes, or the ones available at juiceboxpodcast.com. If you have time, I'd also love it if you check out touchedbytype1.org and t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Touched by Type 1 is my favorite diabetes organization. And T1D Exchange, they're doing research to help people living with type 1 diabetes. And every one of you that completes the research, you just need to be from the United States, have type 1 diabetes, or be the guardian or parent of someone with type 1 diabetes. Anyway, when you finish the research, the podcast gets a little help. You know what I mean? A little cha-ching, and you're helping people live better with type 1 diabetes. It's a great organization, 100% HIPAA compliant, absolutely anonymous. You can take your information out at any time. Just tell them, look, I don't want to be a part of this anymore if you want to, right? So there's no pressure. You'll never have to go to a doctor's office, never have to go to a testing site. And once a year, they'll ask you a couple of questions to keep your information updated. And your answers help shape type 1 diabetes care. It's pretty cool. Being Arden's parent, I was able to fill out the survey. It took me less than 10 minutes. And I did not find any of the questions to be like, I was never like, oh God, why did they ask me that? It was all pretty simple, actually. It was easy to do. I think we're going to record an episode today that has the opportunity to be very controversial.
Oh, great.
But not in a way that I think is going to get us.
Fun.
I don't think it's going to get us in too much trouble. So this is going to sound crazy, right? But I want to talk about how you manage your G6 as far as calibrating it or not calibrating it goes. And I asked online and got 77 replies. I just said to people.
And they're all different?
Oh my God, all of them are so different. So it says, I said Dexcom calibration thread, share what works for you. And I did say your tips may be used in an upcoming episode of the podcast. So first, I guess we'll talk about what we do, and then we'll dig through all of this. Now, for clarity, right? Dexcom, their public statement is that the Dexcom G6 does not need to be calibrated.
It doesn't need to be unless it's unless the system asks for a calibration,
Okay.
which in my year and a half of use of G6 now, I think I've seen it ask for a calibration maybe twice of its own, like, hey, this is not right. Or I think one of them might have been, you're not right, I'm going to give you a calibration. And then the system was like, no. I'm going to ask for a calibration again in like 30 minutes or something. I think what it kind of did.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, technically G6 isn't supposed to require a calibration through the whole 10 days of life,
right?
Unless it requests one.
Okay. All right. So there's a whole bunch of information on the website about it. I'll probably read it at the end just so that it's in here. By the way, keep in mind, I did not tell Dexcom I was making this. I don't do that. So I wasn't like, we're going to do a calibration episode. It's just something people talk about all the time. And every time someone talks about it, it's like religion or politics. Do you know what I mean? Like someone will come in and say, well, here's what I do. And 30 people will be like, that's wrong. Don't do that. And I was like, wow, everyone has such feelings about this, you know?
Yes.
So obviously I think whatever works for you is what works for you. But Jenny, do you have like a way, like when you start a new sensor, is there a thing you do? Or you just pop it in? I
start a new sensor, I pop it in. I expect it's funny. I see a lot of people, work with a lot of people who are like, it always, kind of like you just said, it is always low for a 1 hour, for 5 hours, for 6 hours. After I start it up, I know that it's just going to read me low and whatever. I think I'm sort of odd in that sometimes when it gets going, it is spot on. And I always do a finger stick because I always want to verify where it is. That's just my habit.
Yeah.
Sometimes it stays completely reliable from the get-go. It's great.
Right.
Sometimes it's a little bit off, but then as it kind of keeps going, it gets right on with a finger stick.
Yeah.
And sometimes it has that weird low. The funny thing about that low is it always seems to be, if I have to change the sensor at night, it's gonna be low. And then I'm gonna be fighting the annoying alerts all night long.
All right. Okay. So
always the time.
All right, I can relate to what you're saying. I might take a detour for a second here, but before I do, you're spotty on your end. You plugged in the Ethernet, right?
I did plug it in. Yes.
Okay. All right. Make that mic a little closer to you, please. So
is that better?
Yes, I do think that. What's that old cartoon with the round head? And do you know what I mean? It's like if something's going to go wrong, it will, and it's attributed. How is it possible? I can't remember. Murphy's Law. Oh Murphy's, my God. Yeah. Was it a cartoon or?
Well, you said a cartoon. I think it's actually. I don't know that it's necessarily maybe it is a cartoon. I don't know.
Well, what am I?
It's known as like rule of thumb.
What am I thinking of? I think I may have had a mini stroke just now because I don't think there's any cartoon associated with Murphy's Law. Okay, let's get away from that thought.
And I think that this might also be the issue between my voice.
How did that get there?
It came with the mic.
Okay.
And I always try to be very protective of the mic.
No, Jenny, throw that away.
I always put the little styrofoam thing.
She's got the packing styrofoam between the microphone and her mouth. Will you throw that out, please? No wonder you can't change that light bulb. Everything you said about the light bulb staying in the episode now, just so you know.
Great. Fabulous.
My God.
All right.
So I said at the beginning, but just to reiterate, Arden CGMs usually go on and then they read perfectly. And then sometime in the first hour, it just decides that she's low, like, way lower than she is. And if you let it ride out, it comes back up. Now,
in a particular time, do you have like a defined time that usually?
Yeah, I think if I don't see it in like 3 or 4 hours, then here I go. I calibrate it. If it's not that.
Okay.
Now, I don't calibrate low to 90, right? So we'll talk about that. Like you can confuse the CGM if the reality is too far from where the CGM thinks it is.
Right.
you can't calibrate it because it just does not compute, and you fry its mind, and it takes forever for it to come back from that. But no, if she's 100, and for clarity too, I think this makes sense to say. Obviously, we're using the Contour Next One blood glucose meter. If you have an old janky blood glucose meter, the G6 is probably way more reliable than your old meter is, right? But
correct.
I'm very comfortable that this meter is pretty spot on. And so if the meter tells me she's 100, but it says she's 60, well, then that's too far apart, obviously. And so I'll calibrate it, but I'll tell it like she's 75 and kind of coax it up, and then test her again a little while later and coax it the rest of the way. So that's one of the ways I sort of, if it's too far apart, I calibrate. But I don't.
And you have no time frame to calibration. Coax it kind of midway, like you said. And if it gets up to par quicker, you probably don't calibrate again.
At all. Or at all, even.
Doesn't. Then you'll calibrate again, but that's not like a defined time period after that initial coaxing.
Yeah. I don't have like a magic number to it, like right. Everyone else does. Like, here's a person who said, over 50 points off, I wait an hour for blood sugars to stabilize, and if it's still off, I pull it and get a replacement. Well, that seems aggressive. And I wouldn't do that, because last night, like I said, Arden's sensor went on around 7, came online around 9, was great, said she was low around 10. She was in the shower, but I don't think that has anything to do with it. She gets out, it's wrong for a while, and then it just is right again, and then it just shuts off for like 2 hours. And so last night was an uncommon occurrence for us. We don't usually lose a signal during it. But as it came back on, I calibrated it probably 2 times overnight, and then it's beautiful. Like, if I used this person's theory, I would have pulled it off, and I knew not to pull it off last night. I was like, no, this one's going to come around.
Right.
And it did. Tina says that I calibrate if it's way off after warm up, but only if it's a stable arrow. I didn't do it once and waited for it to catch up, and that sensor ended up being not good. So there's so much anecdotal conversation in this thread. Everybody knows. I bet you if Dexcom was here, they would just tell you, like, don't calibrate it. It'll figure it out, right? But what do you do when it doesn't figure it out?
Yeah, that's when people get frustrated like this. They're like, well, it's clearly not doing what I want it to do. I haven't calibrated. So either I'm just frustrated enough to pull it off and start a new one up, or they calibrate and then they calibrate and then they calibrate and then they calibrate. And, I think Dexcom in the first 24 hours tells you not to calibrate. Leave it alone. The system should right itself. After that, if the system is off compared to finger stick, then if your glucose is less than 70, you can calibrate if there's more than a 30% difference between finger stick and CGM. If your glucose is more than 70 and finger stick to CGM is off by more than 30 points, then you can calibrate.
Okay.
So those are the rules of thumb that at least used to be a piece for Dexcom in terms of when they would say, okay, it's okay now to go ahead and calibrate. Yes, the system technically doesn't require them, but if it's this much off, you could calibrate because clearly it's not keeping you where your finger sticks are. And again, the fact of using an accurate blood glucose monitor, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, you definitely can't use old technology.
No.
There's listen, I'll make this argument all day long. If you've got a 10-year-old meter and you've got a Dexcom G6, you trust the Dexcom G6, not the meter. And you don't tell the Dexcom, who might really know that your blood sugar is 90, that, oh, no, it's not. It's 120. This old busted up meter I have here says so, you know, because then you're literally telling the CGM, well, you're really 120, and it's going, no, we're not. We're 90. And that causes confusion. You know, the next person here says, Stacy goes, don't calibrate. Install the sensor when the BG is most stable, like right before bed. Stay hydrated. Learn what the trends are for you or your child, because everyone is different. Thanks again for the podcast. Okay, that's not about that. But so her explanation is she doesn't like to put on a new sensor in a time of blood sugar turmoil.
Correct.
Up or down or anything like that. Is that also something that helps, do you think?
I would expect that it would help, yes. I mean, do I pay attention to that? No. I mean, when my sensor dies, I replace it and I start it up. But for those who do have more issue with sensor accuracy from the get-go, it could be a very good rule of thumb, because it used to be, I mean, eons ago when sensors first came out, that was the rule. With the calibrations, make sure that you have a stable horizontal line or a horizontal arrow, or there's not a very large rate of change happening, so that the system can kind of get on par with what it's sensing in a more stable setting.
Well, that to me makes sense, because if you're rising quickly and at the moment you're 71 and you tell the thing you're 71, it's aware that you're rising, your meter's not. And so by the time you put the number in, you might be 80. And then that's also, correct. So it's interesting here, because the next Lisa comes in and says, and these two people are parents. It's interesting, the difference between parents, and maybe this is where we really give parents of people with type 1 a little extra, because, you know, they're paying attention a little extra, right? Like Jenny just said, like, I'll put my damn thing on whenever I need to, and that's the end of it. But Lisa said, new sensor inserted and warm during stable time. She says the same thing. And then she says, when it works for her, stay hydrated. Avoid rapid blood glucose changes during the warm-up and the first hours. For example, it looks like they physical exercise. Be suspicious of unexpected values in the first evening. I 100% believe in that. First day of a Dexcom, if I don't trust what I'm seeing, I check.
Right.
She says, she gives a little rule of thumb here. If way off from a finger stick and a flat arrow, I calibrate a value in between, but never more than 2 millimoles or 36. Oh, she's from, Lisa, I think, is Australian, at a time. Normally given one, the sensor gets a brain. Normally given one, a sensor gets a brain. I don't know what she means by that, but so that's it for her, right? If it's way off from a finger stick and you have a flat arrow, I'll calibrate a value in between, but never more than 36 points off for Americans. So I think what she's saying is, if the sensor says she's 100 and the meter says she's 136, she picks a midpoint and tells it, oh, I'm really 118. That's what I said.
It sounds like.
Yeah,
that sounds like what you're doing too.
Coaxing it towards the truth.
Right.
Yeah. It's like the first hour of interrogation after you've been arrested. We don't go right. We don't go right for the did it. We start off with, so were you there?
Right. I do have to say, I guess I didn't really think about it in terms, maybe subconsciously I was thinking about it, but in terms of like the comment about starting a new sensor before exercise, I don't do that.
Okay.
I will, I guess, again, subconscious level, I will start it when I'm not going to be moving so that things are moving quicker. I just do finger sticks. If I have a sensor that dies before I plan to go out, I just do some finger sticks and go about my exercise plan.
Yeah. So. Well, we've run into situations before where we're, throwing on new equipment, honestly, whether it's a pump or a CGM, and we're running out of the house or Arden's leaving, but we're going to split up. And I think I must always say, hey, look, that's a new pump. So, let's be extra careful. That's a new CGM. Pay attention to how you feel. You should probably test in an hour.
Right.
And, I think we all have feelings around technology, like, a continuous glucose monitor or even an insulin pump site isn't a television. It's not just like it works. This thing should do exactly what it's supposed to do every time. There's also a dance it's doing with your physiology. And that's different for many, many of us and not always repeatable in the same ways. So,
right.
like
I think there are some people too, someone who is a very true listener to your podcasts, who I've been working with for a bit, and he actually wears 2 sensors. He wears G6 and he wears a Libre at the same time.
Interesting.
And, you know, a piece of it is the benefit with the pumping system that he uses when he has a new sensor. He wants to be able to continue to feed glucose values to the system in order to keep it running, right? And doing what it's supposed to do. So he uses the Libre data then to plug in the glucose values in order to not have to do finger sticks in that time period, but to be able to still give it glucose values, which I think is, if you don't really care about wearing more robotic parts, that's a great idea, and then in those time periods too. And I've had them. G6 for me has been kind of funny. I would say I have really good accuracy with it, but by about day 8 on 90% of my sensors thus far, day 8, I start to get sensor error, wait 3 hours, and then it'll come back and I'll get a little data, and then it'll give me another sensor error, wait 3 hours. Okay. And at this point, if I get it twice on day 8, I'm like, kaput, the sensor's done. Then I take it off, I call it in. Dexcom's great. They've send me new ones.
Right.
They always ask the same darn questions. I'm like, I don't know why it's dying on day 8 for me, but it is. So, but I mean, in terms of even just the time periods when you get those errors, having a backup like wearing a Libre, which again also doesn't require any calibration,
right.
Kind of can give you a backup in terms of your initial system.
A little overlap.
Right. It's a little overlap.
And we do testing in that time. Like I agree with you. When I see people who are like, oh my God, the worst time in my life is the 2-hour warm up when I don't have Dexcom. Right. And I think those people must be newer to diabetes or to Dex or in general, because I've never once thought, oh my God, we've lost the CGM for 2 hours. Like this thing, like last night, it lasted the full 10 days, like right up to the hard stop. And it wasn't a problem once during the thing. And then the next 2 hours, I just told Arden, I was like in an hour, just test. And if you need insulin, give it to yourself. Like, the way we did it for years and years and years before this technology exists. Right.
I feel like that's probably the case. And it's, I compare it to kind of being like, you're on the mothership and all of a sudden you get like spit out the back door and now you're like lost in space. You're like,
it is fascinating.
Gosh, where am I traveling to? What's going on? I mean, quite honestly, finger stick. I mean, I know that, and for many parents, I think it's hard when you've gotten so used to a system that you feel like you're saving your little one's fingers.
Yeah.
But you know what? They're going to be okay.
It'll be all right.
If you stick their finger, they'll be okay if you get information that's going to help in the short term.
Right. I'm helping a person right now, and I said, hey, why don't you check with the meter? And they have the contour. So I was like, I'm pretty comfortable with this. And they responded back and were like, we never test. And I said, well, you probably should a little bit. And, and now's one of those times. She said, why do you want me to test right now? I said, because we're about to do something and I want to be 100% sure we're doing the right thing. And I don't know you. And, I don't know when you put this CGM on. I don't know how you've managed it. Like, I want a little peace of mind here.
Right.
Don't take your peace of mind from an old meter, but, at the same time. Okay, ready? What do we have here? Dana's got some solid advice, I think. I've probably calibrated every sensor a few times, but it has to be a flat arrow. I use Dexcoms for trends and a finger poke throughout the day. So if it's consistently off by 10 or 20 points over 2 or 3 checks, then I'll calibrate. So if she's off by more, like between 10 and 20 points 2 or 3 times, then she brings the CGM back. I have to admit, I would do that too. Mm-hmm. I don't know that she's saying she does it consistently through every sensor. We don't do that. But if I saw that, I agree I would do it. Mm-hmm. And Arden's A1C very closely matches her Dexcom data.
Right.
So I'm comfortable that I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah, mine does too. And that's a lot of people do some comparison. I mean, I'll usually get emails from people and they're like, well, my GMI from Dexcom was telling me this, but my A1C came back at this. What is the deal? And I know that we've talked about that before on a couple of other episodes, but I mean, you have to understand the difference, blood glucose versus interstitial glucose, a little bit of variance there could be. I myself also have very good comparison between the Dexcom average and my actual A1C. They're close. I think the last one was within like 1 point or 0.1.
Well, that is definitely how I, in the end, assess whether or not I'm managing the sensor well. Right. And it's funny too, because, back in the day when people were rampant for information, back when information used to go really slow, like a new CGM, the G5 would come out and people right away, I'd get the notes. Scott, doesn't work, review it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm not going to know for 3 months. Like, what are you talking about?
Don't ask me 2 days after. Yeah, right.
Here's how we'll know. 3 months from now, I'll look at Arden's data. Somebody sent me an email and said, please say data for me. So I'll look at Arden's data and then I'll look at her A1C. And if they match, I'll say, that CGM must have been pretty good because there's no other way to tell. And so I do think that this is kind of crazy because it's user error a lot of the times, right? And not error like, oh, you screwed up, but I think, oh, you don't know how, which is why I want to put this episode together. Because it is like sometimes this thing needs a little massaging. Chelsea said, we calibrate only if the arrow is stable, usually first thing in the morning and before I go to bed. Keep hydrated. Never calibrate when there is no arrow because she believes that means the sensor's confused in general, right? Correct.
That means the sensor it's still giving you data, but it's making sure like all of its little algorithm, whatever it's doing internally there, it's not giving you an arrow of direction because it's seeing a glucose value, but there's too much flux
for the moment.
It's kind of confused, I guess. Yeah.
She goes on to say, try not to calibrate when food or rapid insulin's on board. And some people say, this is her gleaning, I think, what other people have said to her that works for her. Insert it, let it marinate overnight, and then calibrate it in the morning. And in fairness, Jeanette came in and said this and put arrows to it. Like she was like, I completely agree with this one. Next person says, we rarely calibrate. We know that the Dexcom will oftentimes be off a bit in the first 12 hours. If you do calibrate, do so when numbers are stable and not dropping, increasing quickly.
Right.
Yeah. See, people are starting to...
The marinating idea is it's not, I guess, proprietary to Dexcom. A lot of people with Medtronic do exactly that as well because of, I think their sensor has long-term been a little bit more wonky, kind of in the get-go kind of stage. So there are a lot of people who, even with the older Medtronic sensors, would let it do that like marination. They'd sort of insert it at night. They'd start it up first thing in the morning, still get another 2 hours of wait time period, but it was enough that they got rid of that sink-in period.
Have you ever seen people put a sensor on, and then cover it?
Yes.
And not at all, like put a transmitter in it or anything like that? I've seen people do that.
In fact, I've had a couple of parents who do that with their kids, kind of this marinate idea. They'll use that, whatever it's called, K-band. It's like the sticky wrap. It doesn't really stick.
Like after you give blood now, they wrap it around the cotton.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what they'll do is they'll put the Dexcom on, not put anything in it, meaning like a transmitter. And then they just wrap that around, let it sit, and then they start it up when the actual old sensor dies.
Because and Dexcom's been on and in the past, obviously a lot, and they've I've been told more than once, right? There's this wire that goes in, and it needs time to, let's say, acclimate to the interstitial fluid,
get wet.
Yeah,
essentially is what I say.
So it's soaking in, right? I think is the idea. It's like, I guess it's like it's like taking a log and dipping it in water and pulling it back out right away. The log's not wet in the middle from that, but if you throw it in there for a few hours, it'll soak through.
Right.
Gabriella, I only calibrate within plus or minus 30% of Dexcom readings directionally towards my meter. I don't get into calibration loops as a result. Have you ever seen a calibration loop personally? Where it asks you to calibrate, you calibrate, and then it tells you to calibrate again?
I've not with G6. I have had that with G5.
Okay.
But again, not often either with that.
I think I've seen it, I'd honestly have to say maybe twice. And we've gotten out of both of them by being persistent and doing it. Here's a question for you. Let's say you calibrate and I'm going to try to make up a number here. So let's just say your blood sugar is really 90. The Dexcom says you're 120. And you put in 90 and it says 110. You know, if you put in 90 again, it'll agree with you, right?
I did not. I've never done that.
A double calibration on close numbers forces it to agree. Now, the question in my head always is,
does it stick then?
Is that right to do? Or is it just making me feel better? And all I can say is that when I do that, things go okay afterwards. But I don't know if that's right or wrong. This is probably right where I'm thinking right now people are listening. And they're just like, they're pulling their hair out and punching the dashboard of their car. And they're like, such bad information. Let's keep this in mind. I'm just telling you what I've done in the past. I'm not telling you it's a rule. I'm certainly not saying Dexcom says to do it. We're having a little conversation here about what other people do because it's such a varied thing. Don't do it if you don't like it. Or try it once and see what happens. I don't know. But I don't even know if the outcome's right or not. I do know that it makes me comfortable.
You said you've done it a couple of times, so it seems like it works when you've done it.
Well, I've done it enough to say it out loud and let my voice be recorded while I'm doing it. Yeah. I ain't willy-nilly on here yelling about diabetes stuff.
Right. Yeah, I've never tried that. I guess the next time that I feel like it warrants
give it a whirl, see what happens.
You might give that a whirl and see how that works out, especially at 2:00 in the morning. I'm like, I'm not low.
Elena says, I don't calibrate. I find that calibrating leads to far more inaccuracy than just letting it go. With that said, I do think the first 24 hours or so of a new sensor can be rough, and it eventually works itself out. Tara, we check on the first day. If it is 20 points off, we calibrate, and if it helps it not to be so wonky that day, any other time we spot check it, it's right on. That'll stop it, she's saying. Okay. Molly, I have never had to calibrate, and when I test, as long as my arrow is stable on my Dexcom, they match within 3 to 8 points.
Wow.
That's
great.
Go get them, Molly.
I think, and I think a big piece of this too, which has now been commented a couple of times by people, is hydration. That is and I know we've talked about it before, mentioned it before, that is just enormously important. And I think especially for kids, little kids who you kind of have to coax them to drink more, right? And remind them. I mean, kids without diabetes, I don't even think parents pay attention, honestly, to how much their kid is drinking through the course of the day. But kids with diabetes, certainly, especially with the fluxes that they have in their blood sugar, hydration is huge. And then you've got kids who are very into sport. I mean, they might be doing something for 4 hours, 4 times a week. Make sure they're drinking.
Yeah,
absolutely. But for sensors specific, though, hydration is so important.
Well, your point is well taken, because today in the private Facebook group for the podcast, somebody asked about their creatine bun creatine or something like that.
Their creatinine bun is blood urea nitrogen is what it stands for.
Thank you, Jenny. And everyone who came in who had any kind of a medical background was like, look, if I was you, I would just make sure I'm hydrated.
Yes, correct.
Here, Natasha says, used to try to calibrate after the first 24 hours if Dex was still over 20% off. For the last sensor change, we did a pre-soak. Oh, see that? The new sensor, they soaked the sensor overnight and then snapped in the transmitter in the morning, and it worked without calibrating. Dex was very close to the Contour X1. Thank you for the plug. Once the 24 hours passed.
Nice.
Dex was also less jumpy during the 24 hours. And
I've seen that too. That's actually an interesting comment. With G6, the system has smoothed the data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you get this smoother trend line with less jagged up and down. Yeah. But a lot of people have questioned in that first, like, let's even say 12 hours. Some people do get that, like, that little up down where you can see that the numbers, those little dots every 5 minutes, they are more up down versus this nice smooth into each other. So that's interesting that somebody kind of commented on that.
Well, someone comes in and asks, can you explain pre-soaking? And Natasha went on and said, before the current sensor expires, apply the new sensor, but do not move the transmitter. So the type 1 will still be wearing 2 sensors, one active, one inactive for a period of time. This gives the new sensor a chance to acclimate for longer than the standard 2-hour warm-up period. If you do this, be sure to cover the new sensor to protect the delicate electronics. We use a Band-Aid.
Oh, a Band-Aid.
Yeah. This is completely off-label, obviously. Most of the podcast is off-label, right?
Right, yeah. I would expect that a Band-Aid that's one of those, like, larger Band-Aids would probably be the better option just to really protect that internal part of the sensor. Because, the funny thing about G6, and I didn't realize it initially after I started to wear it, but G6 has this, like, sticky stuff, like, inside. And when you remove your transmitter, you can see it on there. And that's why you have to clean the transmitter off every time you take it off.
Doesn't it remind you of, like, petroleum jelly or something like
that? It does.
I don't know what it is, though.
Yes. Yeah. It's like Carmex or like,
where does it come from?
Like petroleum jelly kind of.
I definitely know what you're talking about. Yeah. Listen, Linda, we never calibrate. And I have to say too, there are sensors for weeks in a row that we don't calibrate. Like I don't need this is interesting to do, but I'm not a person who's in a position of saying, oh wow, we really need to figure out what works. Because what works for us is,
it's going to be what works for you. And you might have sensor to sensor that one, I guess, idea of what to do with this particular issue. Mm-hmm. It could be different 3 months down the road when you've got another sensor. Oh,
Jenny's getting a phone call. Don't worry.
I thought I had it turned off. But yeah, it might be 3 months down the road that it's a completely different calibration need, right? That you do something completely different this time versus the last time that you needed to calibrate.
Yeah, there's 3 people here, Irene, Jeanette, and Jolie, and they all say the same thing. Like, once in a while, like, I put it on and it works great, but sometimes I get it where it asks me to calibrate twice after a warm-up, even though it's not supposed, like, have you seen that?
And if I have, and I didn't see that until, maybe it was the beginning of this summer that I put a sensor on. I gave it the code, it accepted the code. And after the 2 hours, it was like, you need to calibrate with 2 finger sticks. And I was like, but I fed you a code. And then I believe it's every 24 hours then. If it didn't for some reason register the code, even though it told you did, you'll get the 2-hour warm up 2 finger stick. And after that, once a day, you'll get a request for another calibration every 24 hours with a new sensor.
Okay. How amazing is all this, by the way? Listen, for those of you who have walked into diabetes during the time of glucose monitoring, you're probably thinking, oh, this sounds like a problem. And for anyone, Jenny or me with Arden, who were around before this, I think this is all like astonishingly amazing and just magical, Danielle, we rarely check with a finger poke. We only check when we are surprised by what Dexcom is telling us. I think that's important to remember. That is exactly how I feel about it. It's that, like, when I don't know how I know, but when I don't trust it, I don't trust it. And you get that over time, I think.
It's kind of like with the ones that, as you said, they start up and it just reads like LOW. Yeah, you're low. Your blood sugar's like 39. Yeah. I'm like, I don't feel 39. I know. I mean, I have, symptoms, thankfully, for low blood sugar still. And I would know a 39. I mean, I really would. And so I can be like, that's totally wrong. I'm going to do a finger stick and it's going to come back at like 78 or like maybe 90 or something, So symptoms are another piece to it as well. If you are feeling very differently than what the CGM is telling you, even if you haven't done a finger stick in 3 months.
Yep.
Figure out where your glucometer is.
Go find that thing. Dust it off. Megan says, I don't calibrate. If it's inaccurate, we go off finger sticks. Excuse me. Why can't I say finger sticks until Dexcom becomes accurate? My daughter's been wearing Dexcom for 2 years. I only calibrate if it's off by more than 50 points, which is rare. And I only calibrate when the arrow is level. Lizzie says, I have never calibrated a Dexcom CGM.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It must be somebody then who's never been on G5 because that required calibration.
That needed calibration, right. Yeah.
Although, interestingly, I have had people who've worn G5 who've said,
they want it back.
Calibrate it. I just don't calibrate it. I've just let it. And honestly, the system will keep running. Unlike G4 and the previous, if you didn't calibrate it, it would just stop giving you information. G5 would keep giving you data.
Okay.
It would keep asking for calibrations.
But it wouldn't stop giving you the data.
It wouldn't stop giving you data.
Oh, you're right. You're 100% right. I remember that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah, in the morning with no carbs or insulin on board with a level arrow. So we're starting to see some similarities with people's answers that are repeating over and over.
I think if you could put it together in a simple, it would probably be 1, be hydrated.
Yep.
2, make sure that the glucose value is stable or that you're in a stable time period, meaning you haven't eaten like the whole basket of like chicken fries and like ice cream. And now you're waiting for your sensor to give you good data. Right.
Well, here, I'll tell you what, there's a couple of statements in here that really does shine a light on what anecdotal information is, because there's a person, and they're even putting a laughy face in it, who says, I usually only need it during the first sensor session with a new transmitter. I feel like the new transmitter needs a few days to learn me. The transmitter has nothing to do with the measurement of your blood sugar. It's just sending the signal, right? But so that's it, right? Like you see something over and over again, and if you misconstrue it, all of a sudden you feel like it's a rule, you know? Right. It's like when people, like it's Murphy's Law. Oh, that thing always, I love it when people say this about diabetes. This stuff always goes wrong at the worst times. And to that, I always respond, what would a good time be for it to go wrong?
Right.
Every time feels like a bad time.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Going along and living your life, and then all of a sudden something you're counting on stops working. There's a good time for that.
It always stinks.
Yeah.
No matter if it's 2:00 in the morning or when you're on the beach vacation or you're whatever in the middle of a basketball tournament, it's never a good time.
Jeff, Brent, and Jaya, I don't calibrate.
I'm curious for those who are not calibrating,
how close their A1C matches their.
I'd be curious about that, but I'd also be curious if there are also people that may not be doing finger sticks. So they may not really know if their sensor is really off.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because, having had diabetes as long as I have, I didn't have sensors for a good majority of my life with diabetes. I didn't. And I mean, my first sensor was in 2006. That's when I first started using them. And so I still am. I still do finger sticks during the day. Even if it's not to check my CGM, it's because it's time to eat. And I'm
programmed.
I'm just programmed to do a finger stick. I do a finger stick when I wake up in the morning. I do a finger stick at lunchtime. I do a finger stick at dinner time. I always do it before I go to bed. And I'll even do more than that during the day with exercise.
Right.
And it's just a routine. It's like brushing my teeth. It's not something I think about anymore. So I think that I'm also a little bit more in tune then with, my CGM is reading this. My finger stick was this, and for those who pump, especially, if you're relying on the CGM, but you've not really been doing finger sticks and you're kind of wondering why, my GMI from Dexcom is telling me this is my average, but every time I get my A1C done, gosh, it looks like I'm a lot higher.
Yeah.
Well, it could just be that CGM just isn't reading you as accurately.
Do you remember a long time ago in the original Omnipod PDM, there was the meter?
Yes.
And that the meter wasn't great. And so that's how I figured it out, right? So how did I figure out the meter wasn't great? Because Arden's A1C kept coming back higher than it should, and it didn't match. This is before CGM, and it didn't match what the finger sticks were telling me. And that's when
did you figure out how to play with the calibration
then
code?
You change the calibration code and the meter works better. And so I used to, it was 17 or 18, right? All the test strips for the Omnipod PDM are code 16.
16. Mm-hmm.
And some people change the meter to code 17 and some people change the meter to code 18, depending on which ends up being more accurate for them. We were 18. Correct. I know a lot of people were 17.
Yes,
right?
I was 18.
Yes. And then Arden's A1C started matching my expectations, just like that. So you can be mad about it if you want, but at this point now, that meter's a decade old.
Right.
And, and so the people were like, I can't believe that the new Dash doesn't have a meter in it. You don't want a meter in your technology because the meter keeps getting older. All of our new technology now is updatable, right? It's like your iPhone. You want to put a new operating system on it, you can. A new app. But if you stick a physical piece of equipment into it, like a meter, now suddenly you are stuck with that meter forever. Right. And that's I don't think that's a good play. And I think that's why, if I had to guess why Omnipod took it out, I think that's one of the reasons.
It could be. Yeah. I mean, it's also the reason I think that they've decided, now when you get Omnipod, the Dash system, you get the Contour Next one.
Right. And the PDM is now really just sort of like a lockdown Android device.
Right. Exactly.
But the point is that I saw that as I was moving on. I kept thinking like, oh my God, this meter's old. And I felt tied to it at that point. I hate to say this, but I am so much more happy with the Contour Next one than I was with the PDM meter back in the day. I'm thrilled with it. And I think that too, people listening probably were like, oh my God, Scott's taking a meter ad. We know he uses Dexcom. He probably doesn't even use a meter. We use a meter every time we need a meter. And it's a lot more than you think it is. And it's not because Dexcom's not great. It's for the reasons Jenny just said. So I was actually
kind of curious. My insurance doesn't cover the Contour Next one. I wish it did. Mm-hmm. It covers the AccuCheck Guide Me, which is another very really similar to the Contour. It's accuracy kind of parallels, right? But the interesting thing is I do have a Contour Next one, and I had like the sample bottle of test strips that kind of comes with it. And so I played once I got my AccuCheck. I was like, I'm just curious. And they were pretty spot on with each other, quite honestly, which was nice to see. But I also then went back to my old school PDM and my Freestyle Light test strips. And I figured out that actually that code 18
is the one.
If it was the code 18, it was within like 2 to 5 points of the Contour Next and the AccuCheck.
Yep.
So
that's what I figured out.
Even as old school as it is.
Code. I know that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but code 18 for code 16 strips in the old PDM, perfect for Arden.
Was the way to go.
You know what's interesting here? Here I have 3 people in a row who I know are not old school diabetes people, but been at it a long time, right? People whose comments that I'll pay attention to when I see them roll by. Jen, a big no to calibration. Sean, personally, I would never use the G6 without calibrating it. And then the third person, Maria, says, we calibrate if readings are off by more than 20%, but it doesn't happen that often. These are 3 people whose opinion I think are probably pretty good. And they said 3 different things.
And they all do it differently. And I think it's also kind of, as I commented earlier about a good number of my sensors, like just being done on day 8. I think it goes back to the truth in that the sensor filament interacts with everybody's body system, body tissue, interstitial fluid, whatever you're going to call it, a bit differently. I think that's the reason some sensor systems work beautifully for some people and not so beautiful for others. I've got friends who love their Medtronic sensors, get really awesome accuracy. Finger stick CGM, it's always on. They don't have any problems with their systems. I could not get that thing to work for me for the life of me. And I wore both my sensors. I wore Medtronic and Dexcom, and it just never was good.
Well, here's another name that I Kristen, who I know, and she says, I've never calibrated. I do not believe my blood. Here's why. I do not believe my blood glucose meter to be more accurate than my Dexcom. So she just doesn't have probably a meter that she can, confidence in her meter. And some people don't think about that. They're just like, yeah, I checked it. So the meter's like God, the meter said, so the meter's right. Well, some of those meters, if you've seen the testing, I brought it up recently on an episode. There's I think the last one was like 2018, right? And it kind of ranked them. Only like 6 meters even ranked in like, I would use this if I was you. All the other ones were like, don't buy this meter.
Right. Like, variance was way off.
Yeah. Right. Well, okay. We're out of time, aren't we? Because we're also at the end of the list. I only had you for an hour today.
Yes.
So I actually got down to the list. There's I'm sorry, I skipped some that obviously were repetitive. But yeah, like Jenny said in the middle, I think that what works for you is important, that checking with a quality meter is important. And it seems that, the consensus seems to be if you're going to calibrate, make sure you're hydrated, at a stable blood sugar, before exercise, no active insulin, that kind of stuff. So that the thing has a chance to
really read you correctly from the beginning. Yeah.
That's it. I wonder if we'll get yelled at about this. I don't think so. I think we were very clear. Yeah.
I don't think, it's not like we're saying this is what you should definitely be doing 100% to make, that's not, this is not medical advice. This is just discussion.
Jennifer, this is a woke culture. Okay. If you say something out loud that somebody doesn't agree with, you're trying to ruin the world. Don't you understand?
I do understand. Yes.
All right. Listen, I want to wish you a lot of luck changing your light bulb. And I really wish I knew your husband, because I would go behind your back and tell him that you don't know how to change the light bulb.
He will laugh at me. He'll be like, well, don't you see this little like thing on the side? This is where you like pull it off. And so I'm like scouring.
Well, listen, so I'm going to help you for a little bit before you go. Get up on a ladder and look around the ridge at the ceiling to see if there's little set screws that are holding the whole thing up.
There are not.
No set screws.
There are no screws. There's nothing.
So then it's got to be, did you twist it I don't want you to twist it out of the ceiling though.
Yeah, I twisted the glass part of it, which would be the next option, because I've seen the glass bulbs that just twist off, right? This one is either really screwed in unbelievably tight, which I guess might be the case, or maybe I'm just too worried to try to unscrew it like heavier because I don't want it to crack in my hand.
Here are my 2 thoughts. When you're trying to turn it, is the metal base turning with it?
No.
Okay. So maybe I don't think you have to turn the base, but what I am thinking is it possible that it's a reverse thread?
Oh, counterclockwise.
Maybe you have to turn it the other way.
The opposite.
I wish you had enough time. I would like to make you go up right now and turn it and see if it comes off. But instead, I will just wait for your text message later. And
I will let you know whether I required help to change the light bulb or not.
I 100% agree. You shouldn't tell anybody about this. That's all.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good weekend.
See you. You too. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Hey, everybody. Jenny's gone. I'm still here. We're going to do everybody's favorite podcast thing. I'm going to read to you for a second. This is from Dexcom.com in their frequently asked questions. The question is my Dexcom sensor accurate? Heading Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitoring system, reading and meter value. Whether you're new to Dexcom or experienced, review product instructions before using the Dexcom G6. Keep using your blood glucose meter to make treatment decisions until you know how Dexcom works for you. Your meter gives you one number if you test twice, using the same or even different meter. It gives you another number, and your Dexcom G6 gives you a third. What do you do with all those numbers? Next heading is the test. The test your doctor does is considered a more accurate glucose number than any products you use at home. Both meters and Dexcom G6 are compared to that doctor's test to measure accuracy in clinical studies. They aren't compared to each other. Because of this, the Dexcom G6 reading and meter value are unlikely to be exactly the same number, but they should be close. Compare the meter and your Dexcom G6 to see how closely the numbers match each other. If your G6 reading and meter value are within what we call the 20 rule, also known as the 20% 20 rule, they match closely. Here's the rule. To use the 20 rule, follow these steps using the table below. My gosh, there's a table. Look up your meter value in the green middle column. The left G6 column shows the low range for G6 reading okay, you're going to have to go look at this yourself. I'll put a link in the show notes for this 2020 rule. Goes on to talk about good finger stick practices, When you're using your meter, make sure your test strips are stored as directed and not expired. Your hands are clean for finger sticks. Wash your hands thoroughly with soap and water, not hand gel, and dry them, then test. There are times when the numbers temporarily don't match, but are likely to become closer over time. For example, the sensor's first day. With newly inserted sensors, the difference between your meter value and your G6 reading may be greater. Generally, the match gets closer over the first 24 hours. Glucose changes quickly. When your glucose is changing quickly, it is more difficult to compare numbers. The meter and Dexcom G6 measure glucose from different sources. They are blood and interstitial fluid. And blood glucose changes a little before interstitial fluid. The match gets closer and easier to compare when your glucose stabilizes. Pressure on the sensor. When something is pressing on your sensor, it can affect your G6 readings. The match should get closer after the pressure is relieved. That, of course, is what people call a compression low. So everything they're saying here matches pretty much everything that we found talking to Jenny, my experiences, and what everybody in the Facebook page was saying. To determine what to do, watch your G6 readings over several hours. If the readings are always higher or always lower than your meter values and always outside of the 20 rule, consider calibrating. Also consider calibrating if your Dexcom G6 and meter numbers don't match and your expectations or symptoms fit the meter value, not the G6 reading. Calibration. Calibrating your G6 with your meter is never required. It can make the Dexcom G6 more accurate or less accurate compared to lab results, but it should bring the G6 reading closer to the meter. When calibrating, make sure you enter the calibration within 5 minutes of taking the finger stick. You don't calibrate during a sensor error. If you like, you can calculate the 20 rule on your own. The Dexcom G6 reading must be within 20% of the meter value when the meter value is 80 mgdl or higher. 20 mgdl of the meter value when the meter value is under 80. Please note that the information listed here is applicable to the Dexcom CGM user within the US only. I cannot just read you this link because it looks very, maybe I can. Hold on one second. So it's dexcom.com/FAQS/is-my-Dexcom-sensor-accurate. Like I said, I'll put a link in the show notes. Huge thanks to the Contour Next One blood glucose meter for sponsoring this episode. Go to contournext.com/juicebox to learn more. And thanks to touchedbytype1.org for being such a wonderful long-term friend of the show. Check them out, touchedbytype1.org. Of course, if you'd like to get a Dexcom CGM, dexcom.com/juicebox. You can get a free, no-obligation demo of the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump at myomnipod.com/juicebox. Take the survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. You guys ready to hear Jenny admit to not being able to do something that I think she's kind of embarrassed about and some other chitter chatter? If you're looking for bonus material, I got you covered.
Morning, I've fed children, I've gotten them changed, I've wiped butts, I have washed my hands, and then I picked my tomatoes and my peppers from my garden. And
Jenny, what time did you get up?
6 o'clock.
Oh, so last night.
That was 7 o'clock your time.
Oh, yeah. Last night, as Arden's pump was winding down, I was like, it'll make it overnight. Then her CGM ended. Right. And we changed her CGM around 7 o'clock, and it was done. It lasted the entire, 10 days. It was working great right when it shut off. And we hit like a little bit of a bleeder. I was like, that'll probably be okay. So it comes on in 2 hours, and Arden's CGM starts are all exactly the same. It comes on, knows her blood sugar perfectly, and within an hour tells me she's low when she's not. And then we coax it along and get it going, and it's fine. So this happens. Around midnight, I go to sleep. And at 2 a.m., Kelly wakes me up and she goes, hey, I need help We changed Arden's pump because her blood sugar was going up, and her CGM's lost its signal. And I was like, okay,
nice.
No problem. I'll take care of it. You go back to sleep. And I did take care of it, Jenny. And then I went back to sleep at 6 a.m. I was up for 4 hours in the middle of the night. And,
oh, no.
And it would come back and it would go away, and it would come back and it would go away. But I know it's going to be all right. And if this would have happened in the middle of the day, I want to be clear that this doesn't happen often to us. It just happened this time at a really bad time. But since it did happen, I know what I want to talk about today.
Oh, great. And while we're doing that, I'm going to I've got
what are you doing?
God, I have so many cords in my
got
life.
Wires and cords. What's going on?
What is the deal with cords, right?
The room is cleaned up, though. It's different.
Because we are putting in new floors in this room.
No kidding.
This is the bigger of. We put in new floors in our living room. We are purging our home of carpet.
Okay.
Blah. So living room got done. Now we're moving on to the space that has been my office, which interestingly it's the bigger of the two spare bedrooms, right?
Okay.
And so we're going to put new floors in here, and then we're going to put new floors in what is now the room that the boys technically share.
Okay.
We're going to then transition rooms. I'm going to take that room, which is actually the smaller, and we're going to move their stuff in this room, and this is the bigger of. So
you're under. Well, listen, we are
fun stuff.
It's amazing. I know. There's nothing like being an adult, is there? We just ordered
adulting stinks.
A floor for Arden's room, and Arden just picked this floor that wasn't very expensive. So we were like, okay, yeah, you can have that. She's like, can I do this? And when she picked that one, we were like, yes, you can. And you absolutely can. But we're replacing, it's funny you said this, we wanted to replace, we have hardwood through most of our house. So the kids' bedrooms and this room I'm in is carpeted, and then our living room is carpeted, but everything else has tile or wood. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to make the living room tile or wood or something. We weren't really sure what, because one of the bonehead mistakes we made when we put the house together was we bought this carpeting and didn't realize, and dog owners will know right away, you don't buy looped carpeting with a dog, right? And we didn't know that. Our carpet
or cats
or I think the over-under on pulls that I fixed in that carpet have to be in the thousands, or sometimes the dog's leash or something gets caught on, he runs away and just yanks out 6 inches of carpet, and I actually get back down on my hands and knees with a hot glue gun and toothpicks and put each one back in again, right? Horrible.
Oh my God, you have so much more time than me.
Oh my God. Well, the other option was to burn the house.
Bad.
The other option would have been to burn the house down. It was right in the middle of the room, I was like, we got to get out of here. It was just really bad. And so we can't afford to put wood down or what we wanted to put down in there right now. So we just went out and bought a really inexpensive piece of carpet, and it's being delivered in a couple of days. I can't believe we're doing flooring at the same time.
At the same time. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen the floor in that room. Usually there's a nice couch behind you, and that's all I see besides closet doors.
Yeah. Well, my son stole the couch, just so you know. So that's gone now. He's like, I'm going to take this sofa into my room and he's home forever. So we're like, all right, I'm like, going to take the couch, so he's got that. And I have all of Arden's junk in here because we're waiting for the flooring to be put in her room. So it's a bit of a disaster. Yeah. Anyway.
But I was going to say, I'm going to get yet another cord because I totally forgot to plug the cord for the
computer,
direct connect in. So give me a sec.
Yeah, sure. I make Jenny plug her. I don't let her use Wi-Fi while we're doing this. So she's dragging an Ethernet cable across the room.
Okay. And I also realized that I have no clue how to change the lights.
What do you want to change in there? What do you mean?
The light bulbs in the ceiling died.
You don't.
I cannot figure out how to get the light.
What the hell are you talking about? Let me see.
I don't know how to get it off. I have no idea.
Is there
how
no
to get it
screw in the
off.
middle of it that's
There
visible?
are no screws. I've tried to
Turning the
move it.
glass?
It doesn't unscrew. I don't know what to do. So I have a big old like floor lamp in here now so that I actually have light.
Have you brought anyone else into to try to figure it out?
No. Mm-mm. I should ask.
I
should ask my husband.
Do you not want to tell your husband you can't figure out how to change the light bulbs?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not this dumb. Like, I don't know what the deal is. So.
Well, you're not wrong. Is it glass? It's a dome, right?
And it's glass.
Right.
So it's like the wrong move. Like I think I also need to get like a taller.
Are you reaching
ladder,
like this? Yeah.
Because I've got just the basic, which this stool has worked fine for all of the other like ceiling things, right? So
one.
Why wouldn't it work for this one?
How long has the light bulb in that light been working for you? Is this the first time you try to change it?
It is. We moved in. It'll be October 1st. It'll be 2 years in this house. And we've not changed the light bulbs in this light since, obviously.
Wow, it's a good run.
What I'm doing.
It's a good
right.
run.
And good lights, I guess, but they also don't get used that often, because I'm really only in this room during the daytime.
Okay.
And so unless it's really dark in here, I typically don't usually use them.
I hear you.
But anyway, yeah.
Cool. All right, listen, let's try to bring your microphone a little closer to you.
Closer to me. Is that better?
Try again.
Better?
Yes. That's excellent.
Okay, there's the spot,
good. That's
right?
a good spot. So hopefully we've answered some of your questions today about how to calibrate or not calibrate your Dexcom G6, and the other burning question, how many people does it take to change a light bulb in Jenny's house? As of now, we know the answer to be more than one, if Jenny's involved and it's in her office. Thanks so much for listening to the Juicebox Podcast. Please take the time to share the show with a friend and leave a wonderful 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you are so inclined.